We human beings like to organize things. No, we need to organize things. And I don't just mean physical things like clothes or papers or books. We have a need to create order out of the apparent chaos that is life and community. That's why we're so fond of classifying people and groups. Sometimes our classifications are too simplistic, dividing the world of people into two opposing camps: liberals versus conservatives, rich versus poor, straight versus gay. You get the idea. But we know that the world is not so easily divided into binary categories. But the temptation to do it is still very real. But turns out there are some ways that we can categorize people in ways that are very useful. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Monday, June 10th, 2024. Classifying people and groups can be a helpful way to gain a sense of order in an otherwise disordered, chaotic world. It helps us get our bearings in life. That's why H. Richard Niebuhr's Christ and Culture has had such staying power. He suggested a series of typical ways Christians have answered the vexing question of how we live as Christian people, maintaining faithfulness to Jesus Christ, all the while functioning within societies that also ask for our loyalty. This week, I want to explore with you how Niebuhr goes about analyzing groups in the church to develop his typology. This week, I'll examine each of several theological issues he uses to establish his typology. But before I do that, there is one very important thing to say about the idea of types and typologies. When we talk about types of people, types of groups, or any type of social phenomenon for that matter, we're getting into the field of sociology. Sociologists regularly classify groups of people based on any number of characteristics. They call it a typology. Typology can mean both the study of types generally or the specific way of categorizing people and groups. One very common typology that you've probably heard of and that's been popular for many years now is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI. It's a way of classifying people by personality type based on four polarities: introversion versus extroversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. But here's the thing. Typologies are not the same thing as taxonomies. Oh, okay. So what's a taxonomy? A taxonomy is a scientific system of classifying objects through empirically verifiable physical characteristics. We can classify animals, for example, through an increasingly specific set of criteria: mammal or non-mammal, vertebrate or invertebrate, fish, fowl, and so on. Taxonomies are based on physical characteristics that are objectively observed. But many people confuse typologies with taxonomies. Typologies generally concern behaviors, which are inevitably open to interpretation. Classifications based on behaviors are inherently subjective. Taxonomies, on the other hand, are generally based on physical characteristics that can be objectively observed and classified. I know I'm getting into the weeds just a little bit here, but I think it's helpful to understand what H. Richard Niebuhr is doing in Christ and Culture. He's developing a typology of different ways Christians over the centuries have tried to come to terms with the competing demands of Christian discipleship and life in human community. And like any typology, Niebuhr's typology is subject to debate and disagreement. In the 75 years since he delivered his lectures at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, scholars have debated the accuracy and usefulness of his typology. And they should. No typology is perfect because it is a description of behaviors, which are always open to subjective interpretation. By the same token, though, Niebuhr's typology has remained a standard which students and scholars have used ever since. There's a reason why his book has remained in print all this time. It's because, for whatever drawbacks it may have, It remains a useful tool for talking about the differences we see in how different church traditions operate. Just one other quick word, and then we're off to the races. Niebuhr didn't invent the idea of typologies when analyzing the church, and his typology closely resembles the typology of an earlier German scholar named Ernst Troeltsch. Troeltsch's major work was a book called The Social Teachings of the Christian Churches. In it, he created a three-part typology of churches, sects, and monasticism. Scholars have long noted the family resemblance of Niebuhr's work to Troeltsch's. So where does this leave us? And why is this important? Simply this. We human beings have a real need to have ways to understand our very confusing world. Organizing people and groups using typologies helps us get our bearings. Niebuhr's way of describing different typical answers to the Christ and culture problem potentially helps us not only understand, but even appreciate those whose approach to the problem is different from our own. And that's worth the price of admission right there. When we return tomorrow, we'll start working our way through the polarities and theological issues Niebuhr uses to create his typology. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.